So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Wednesday, January 22nd, 2014 edition of the Urban Village Development Commission. I apologize that I'm not wearing Seahawks colors, Mr. McKillop. I will try better next time. I did wear my Seahawks socks on Sunday, so go Hawks. We have, looks like one main item tonight we'll be getting into, amongst other things, a lot in Bellevue College. But our first order of business is to approve the minutes from last meeting. Did you guys get a chance to read all 176 pages of our packet? There were some other shaking heads besides mine.
Yeah.
Did anyone have any changes or comments on the minutes as they were returned to us? They were really well done. That's always nice to get a good compliment. Would anyone like to move for approval of said minutes? Chantal moves. Anybody second? All those in favor of adopting the minutes? All right, thank you very much. And with that, we have our main agenda item of Bellevue College, and our first note is we're going to do the staff presentation first and then the applicant report after the staff presentation. So with that, it looks like I'm going to turn it over to Lucy.
Right, and just to let you know, this is a site development permit, so your responsibility is as decision maker, and so that does make it a quasi-judicial action, and we'll review that next time, but it just means that you need to have all your conversations on the microphone and not have conversations outside, but we'll
Thank you, Lucy.
go into more detail next
when you
time.
do that. And so given that, is there anything anyone needs to say about any dealings we've had other than having driven by Bellevue College hundreds of times? That's it? Okay, thanks, Lucy.
Yeah. So, we are doing the Bellevue College site development permit. Okay. So, the first thing I wanted to start with was just a little bit of orientation. We think of everything up there sometimes as Issaquah Highlands, but this is actually in an area with a separate development agreement, which is the WSDOT TDR development agreement, which is the sort of tan area. The site is the darker area. The rest of what's shown up here is Issaquah Highlands. And I just wanted to point out that the blue area is the WSDOT expansion area of Issaquah Highlands. So that's sometimes confusing, but when referring to WSDOT tonight, it'll be relative to the TDR Development Agreement Urban Village area. So zooming in a little bit, this light blue dashed line is the WSDOT TDR Development Agreement boundary, and again, the property. I'm going to just kind of go give a quick tour of what's around it. To the east is Central Park, which is mostly built out but not entirely. To the north is Grand Ridge Elementary, with the building at the north end of the property near Park Drive, and their playfield is down here, and it's below the road. The orange represents some of the immediate residential that's in the area. Mostly it's single family, but this project here, which is Avalon Windhaven, includes stacked flat and garden apartments. There are two wetlands. The main one that affects Bellevue College is this one, and then there's one to the south. They're both in what we call the WSDOT rural or WSDOT open space. And then along the immediate east edge is in gray the BPA power corridor, and then there is a protected 100-foot kind of buffer on that east side. I provide this just because we usually give you photos of the site, but in the WSDOT TDR development agreement, you're not allowed to clear the site until there's a approved land use permit, which would be this if you approve it. And so I'm showing you this just because it's all forested. However, you can see some of the edges around the site. This photo number 1 is taken down here looking up College Drive towards the property, and the forested edge you see here is the wetland, and then beyond that is Bellevue College. Photo 2 is taken from Forest Ridge, Parcel C by Polygon, and the King County Trail starts in their property and then kind of winds around and comes out down here. And actually, this photo number 3 is the other end of the trail as it comes out of the woods, heads up the hill to the soccer fields in Central Park, and then looking north in the BPA. And you can see that it's a pretty sort of natural rural character in the BPA with some great views. Yeah.
So the trail, the path, is completely inside or outside of the property?
So the King County Trail goes, those two ends that I'm showing from 2 to 3, the trail goes all the way through. It does not go through Bellevue College's property, it's just south of their property. It'll show up on another map here.
Sorry, that's
okay.
the hardtop trail, and then that won't be disturbed through the
Right.
process.
They're proposing some connections, but the trail is complete.
Okay, thanks.
So this is the existing site topography. It drops about 130 feet from the upper northeast corner to the lower southwest corner. There are 2 main roads that connect to Bellevue College. One is Park Drive, and the other is College Drive. College Drive was built as, most of it, not all of it, was built as part of the improvements with the WashDOT development agreement. And then there, along those roads, there are sidewalks on both sides, bike lanes on both sides, and then in addition, there's the trail along the lower south edge. In terms of immediately adjacent off-site circulation changes, the College Drive, this kind of gray line here is where College Drive is currently located, and they're proposing to make it into more of a traditional intersection with potentially a roundabout here. There would be 2 connections from College Drive into the site, and then 1 trail connection. This continues on down to connect. They've proposed a 3rd pedestrian and vehicular connection down here and this is just a graphic thing. These 2 pieces would actually connect, but I couldn't make the drawings do it. So they're proposing a 3rd connection that would come off their property through the forested 100-foot area and then into the BPA and up into this existing roundabout in Central Park. This is obviously all off-site. There are some restrictions on that forested area. The BPA has restrictions about what kinds of activities could take place there. There's a mountain bike skills course that's proposed in this area. So there's several things that would have to get relocated, sorted out, easements relocated. So there's a condition that I'll read later on that speaks to the fact that we've reviewed this proposal as if that BPA connection is not there, but we've also are agreeing that that's an option to be pursued, but at this time we don't know whether that's viable or not. On-site circulation, there is a street. This is a street section pretty much all the way around the loop, except for this eastern part on what we call the Upper Loop Road, which is more like a muse. If you remember some of the muse. Thank you for laughing, Nina. It's a street section in that pedestrian facilities are provided separately from the travel lanes, but you don't necessarily have curbs, and you use bollards to denote the different use areas. So it makes for more of a flow all the way across from building to building. They proposed a bus loop off the east side of the roundabout like this, and then again that potential road that we called the Central Park Spur. For on-site pedestrian circulation, again, the streets have sidewalks on both sides, and except for the Central Park Spur Road, all of the roads have bike lanes. There is also in the plazas essentially what I called in the staff report a pedestrian axes, a pair of axes that provide a lot of the on-site pedestrian circulation. And I also wanted to point out that in this area, if you came in on one of these two sidewalks, you'd go under the overpass, and then there's a ramp system that brings you up on top of the podium. And as I mentioned, this is a pedestrian bridge and this is a pedestrian bridge. So these plazas, these pedestrian axes are actually going over the road, providing completely segregated pedestrian circulation and gathering spaces. And then there's a trail, this is an amphitheater, and they've proposed a trail that then would connect down to the King County Trail. 5 buildings are proposed. They have 372,000 square feet, which is the maximum, and then additional square footage for accessory uses. They've done this in a, as I mentioned a moment ago, a podium configuration that creates a level plane, partly for overlook, partly to minimize regrading, partly to ensure that the entire site is accessible to people with disabilities. And then the other building that you saw in here that was not highlighted is a structured parking garage, the ground floor of which would have a retail sort of front. So the idea really is to that this upper loop road be strongly framed by buildings. In terms of open space and public plazas, there's a very sizable area up here at the north, and then smaller spaces along this part of the spine, as well as each of the entries along the upper loop road. On the west side of the site, there's the amphitheater, or, I mean, that's a proposed feature, but there'll be some kind of outside gathering piece here, and then the 2 smaller green ovals represent meadows, is the way they described it. So they're beginning to make a transition back into the forested area, and the proposal is that this kind of clouding along here indicates where the edge of where they would clear. So most of the western portion of the site would remain untouched. And then just because I know you guys are always interested in sort of how large blocks are broken down, this block is about 700 feet in length, and these pedestrian through routes break it down into 200 or 250 foot long blocks. Parking, the map on the left really is just to show you the buildings that we've been looking at along the way, and so that you can get a sense of what's happening below those buildings. All the buildings along here have under-building parking. The building on the east side of the site also does, and it receives its access from the parking garage right here. And these sort of brown arrows indicate where you access the parking. So they've really concentrated the access to the garages on the lower loop road, and then off the parking lots down here to really keep this area free from heavy traffic, vehicular traffic. About 10% of the parking is in these 2 surface parking lots. Now, keep in mind this is at build-out. There will probably be predominantly surface parking in the early phases, but this is the full build-out scenario. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there's additional parking proposed in the BPA over here all the way on the right. And this blue box represents everything under the buildings, and the podium is not just parking. That space would be a large, open, potentially high-height space that could be a gym, could be a performance hall, could be a dance studio. Depends on the kinds of programs that end up locating out here. That's it. So now for the part we all love. I'm going to go through the conditions. I only read through the ones that are non-standard. If you happen to see the memo, we have made a few changes to the staff report. One of those was to put all of the construction conditions in a separate attachment to the staff report. That's the good news. But that means that most of the conditions that are attached to the staff report are not standard ones. So there's fewer of them, but more unique ones. So condition 1 is a standard condition. Condition 2, prior to the submittal of any permit for construction, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it is 36. Someone's paying attention. Yes. Ready? Okay. Prior to the submittal of any permit for construction, for example, with the project feasibility pre-application meeting required by condition number 5, the applicant shall provide the city with a plan that includes all dry and wet utility vaults, cabinets, switchgear, pull boxes, meters, equipment, and appurtenances. The purpose of the plan will be to confirm that the location of this equipment and the appurtenances is consistent with the approved SDP, pedestrian orientation, and the sociable public realm. Anything not shown on the preliminary submittal, location, relative height, presence at the surface or above ground, is presumed to be located within the structure. Any revisions or additions to what the preliminary submittal has shown and approved outside of the structure requires modification except fire hydrants. Condition 3 and 4 are standard. Condition 5, additional review and discussion of each phase is required prior to official site work, landscape, or building permit submittal. For example, using the project feasibility pre-application meetings. The purpose is to review submittals at a more detailed level prior to permit submittal. The application and the staff report provide a conceptual level of design unless modified by the notice of decision for this application or is identified in the staff report and its attachments. The applicant must schedule these preliminary meetings with sufficient time to allow necessary review, or the construction permit submittal may be deemed incomplete until such time as the preliminary review has occurred and issues, conflicts, code, or SDP conditions are resolved. 6, the applicant may build up to 372,000 square feet of institutional uses. In addition, the campus may choose to include additional square footage for accessory uses consistent with the provisions and uses listed in the development agreement, with additional evaluation of infrastructure to support the accessory uses per the purchase and sale agreement.
Would you like questions now or later?
I'm fine with them now.
Okay, on that one then, thank you. Is there a limit? In addition, the campus may choose to include additional square footage up to some maximum? Okay.
There was, so there was no number provided, but there are infrastructure limits and there are very specific uses listed. So it would have to be consistent with those uses and meet the infrastructure requirements in the purchase and sale agreement. Number 7, design the campus side of College Drive as a pedestrian-oriented, welcoming face to the street and Issaquah Highlands. This includes minimizing the setback of the buildings, reducing the grade separation between the sidewalk and the first occupied floor, structure any setback provided to make it less of a buffer, design the buildings to be open towards the street through modulation, the provision of openings, and selection of materials, etc.
Could we drop et cetera? Seems kind of open-ended.
Well, I mean, there are other, so I would then need to list every single
Could we just
possible.
put like selection materials, design features, and planning options? And that leaves it pretty open, but it's not just et cetera. I know it's a minor thing, but
Okay. Okay. Number 8 is a standard one. Number 9, provide a southern pedestrian connection to the King County Trail. Preferably this will be from the north-south spine, but as a secondary option, a connection on the east side of Building 3B will be considered if it is pedestrian-oriented and provides grade separation from vehicular routes such as the underbuilding garage entry. Number 10, the modified cross-section of College Drive, specifically the center median that is shown on the plans, is not approved with this application. Prior to approval of any site work permits that would modify the cross-section of College Drive, the applicant must provide an engineering analysis that is stamped by a professional engineer that demonstrates the traffic and level of service assumptions included in the project EIS are still valid and can be accommodated with the modified section. This includes the impacts of a right turn only exit from the lower loop road and the level of service assumptions and queuing analysis for both on-site and off-site roadways. Number 11, the intersection of the lower loop road and College Drive may be configured as a driveway entrance with a curb ramp that provides the vertical grade transition from College Drive to the lower loop road. As an alternative, and as shown on the plans, the intersection may be configured as a roadway intersection. In this case, the vertical transition must meet AASHTO and city road standards, which might necessitate the reconstruction of a significant portion of College Drive in order to meet transition requirements. 12, the applicant must obtain the written approval of the BPA in the city for use of the BPA easement area and relocation of the mountain bike skills course in the configuration shown or other acceptable arrangement. Off-site parking and a vehicular connection to Central Park are not required to allow this proposal to proceed. 13, the applicant must provide the bus loop on Bellevue College property or obtain the permission of an adjacent property owners. The bus loop shall be designed to facilitate bus service and minimize impacts on the pedestrian and building environment, such as locating it completely to the north of Building 2A.
Lucy, I'm sure you'll cover that, or somebody will cover that separately, but is this intended for Metrobus? So,
Yes.
and is there any work done towards?
So I'd recommend that you ask the applicant that when they make their presentation, because that's something they've have more information on.
Okay.
The applicant shall include on the face of each building permit the number of PM peak hour trips from that application. If the total number of PM peak hour trips from all approved uses and buildings exceeds 907, the applicant shall prepare and obtain approval of a transportation management plan that limits the traffic from all previous uses to 907 PM peak hour trips. 15, the amount of required parking that is provided will be determined with each new building permit based on building square footage in order to ensure that the amount of parking is consistent with the demand. However, parking beyond the maximum allowed with a phase may be constructed if the excess parking is provided in a parking structure, garage, or under building, except that at no time may the total constructed parking exceed the maximum allowed at total build-out.
So Lucy, how does that work with the, somewhere in here it says the number of stalls for total build-out is 1,300 and something?
So they proposed 1,300 and something. The maximum allowed based on the square footage is 1,700.
Right.
So what we're saying is if there's the minimum and the maximum, so they have to build within that with each phase. But if, for instance, they were proposing to build the parking garage at an earlier in the project, and that would take them over the maximum allowed based on the number of buildings they built, we would allow that to facilitate the building of the garage. Does that make sense?
Okay, so in the end, it's still going to have that number that
Right,
they
it can't
proposed.
exceed the maximum that they could have at full build-out.
Thanks.
So a follow-up question to that, Lucy. This says it's based upon building square footage. Other times we've seen based upon like bed usage or housing units. So for a college, is it strictly square footage or
Yes.
is it, okay. Okay.
16, prior to the submittal of the construction permits for each phase, the applicant will prepare a parking traffic study to confirm that the placement of garage entrances and exits will not result in impacts to public rights-of-way or general functionality of the facilities. 17, all required parking for the project must be provided on the property unless an agreement is obtained from BPA and/or the owner of said property to construct surface parking stalls off-site.
I'm wondering how that off-site BPA parking, how does that work into the arithmetic for the number of stalls? Is that part of it?
Well, currently, they are assuming that they would have that, but they would be able to add additional floors to the parking garage if they were not able to.
So that's trade area then? Okay.
And I think the other piece, and you feel free to ask them about this as well. I think part of the attraction for building in the BPA is that it would hopefully be shared with the park and therefore get more use around the clock. And, that has an appeal as well.
So we might need to go to math camp on that with condition number 12, because it says off-site parking and a vehicle connection to Central Park are not required to allow this proposal to proceed. Seems a little bit contradictory, so.
No, because they can add an extra floor onto the parking garage to provide those spaces that are currently shown in the BPA if they're not able to get permission to build there.
Okay.
So the off-site parking is included in the maximum allowed as well as in the calculated amount that they're expecting?
Just to rephrase to make
Yeah.
sure I'm understanding what you're saying, if the maximum that they're allowed is 1,700 and change, those parking stalls wouldn't fall within the 1,700 maximum they're
They
allowed.
can't do 1,700 plus the BPA.
Right.
Okay, thank you very
But
much.
that would be a good thing to clarify.
Later on, yeah.
Okay. 18 through 22 are standard conditions. 23, with each phase of development and prior to submitting permits for construction, for example, with the project feasibility pre-application meeting required by condition number 5, the applicant shall provide a study acceptable to the designated official and based on the objective campus needs to demonstrate that loading will function as necessary to serve the uses to be proposed in that phase. This would include the loading locations, quantity, for example, loading stalls adequately meet the demand, and the size of vehicle, for example, type A 18-wheeler. The loading docks shall be sited to minimize their impact on pedestrian areas and to ensure functionality. 24 is standard. 25, fill may not exceed 12 feet from the normalized pre-development grade. The applicant may apply for an administrative modification of standards with construction permits to address exceeding the standard in limited locations if necessary once the design is refined.
About that, don't you? This seems like a different number than I've seen before. I've seen 10 before, I think I've seen 8 before, but I don't know if I've seen 12 before. Where'd this number come from?
So different development agreements have different numbers, and this development agreement has 12. And currently, their estimates show exceeding this just kind of in spots to level out a certain dip, which seems like a reasonable possibility. But because this is a conceptual plan, we need more information and more definite information about the fills before we go down that road. 26, prior to the approval of the first utility permit that would enable the construction of impervious surfaces, the applicant must submit and receive approval for a master drainage plan that details the stormwater conveyance, treatment, and outfall facilities and describes how they are in compliance with the development agreement, the SEPA analysis, and city codes and standards.
Thank you, Lucy, for letting us do this as we go along, because there's so many. How does the recent city-level discussions about stormwater in Issaquah Highlands and the Lower Reed and new arrangements for stormwater impact this sort of thing in this application?
Separate basins. My little birdie tells me. And go ahead.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Why isn't this a standard?
Why isn't what a standard?
Why isn't that number 26 a
Oh, a standard condition?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the MDP has already taken place. You're right, it's not a particularly unique condition. It's just not one that we apply that often, actually. And number 27, luckily, is a standard condition.
Lucy, I have a question about 24.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure we'll get landscape later on. We can discuss this further, but the edge parking lot landscaping, 40 inches in height, continuous. I'd like to see that defined when we talk about landscaping, because I'm concerned about sight lines for vehicles when they're merging and exiting from the two parking lots there, or the surface lots as they go along. I know in some areas it's difficult to see when you're driving a car, not a truck, especially with 40-inch height. So I'd like to see that defined, to how close to the entrance and exits it has to be. Because right now it just says continuous.
Why don't we look at that as part? I mean, I don't disagree, and I think the question for us will be: do we just need to document that in the briefing response memo that would be part of the review, or do we need to change the condition? Eric?
Can I just get clarification? Very early on, you showed a buffer along the BPA.
Mm-hmm.
And can you just clarify, I guess that's a buffer to protect BPA, or
So,
right
that's,
there?
yep. I don't think that's what it was for, Eric.
Yeah.
It was created as part of this development agreement, and I think partly it was for sight lines from the homes that are up here along the ridge, above South Pond, or maybe you don't know, but there are homes that are significantly higher, and I think it was just to provide sort of a screen relative to a less residential appearing neighborhood.
Oh, thank you, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like the trees will be left in that buffer zone, or, okay. Yeah, it makes sense, thanks.
Okay, I'll hand it over to the applicant. Yes. Do Do you want to map up? Whoops. Sure. How about that one?
Sure. That's pretty. Good evening, folks. My name is Ray White. I'm the Vice President for Administrative Services at Bellevue College. And gosh, we've been working on this a long time. I'm sitting here, I'm so proud. I'm actually here going through the project. And it's been quite a while. I wanted to thank you, Lucy, for you and the rest of the staff who did put so much work into this for us. Excited. I get a lot of comments from the community saying, we're excited that you're coming. And I get a lot of comments from my campus saying, we're excited that we're going. And yet I spend my time kind of managing expectations about when that's going to be. I've got some folks who say, when can I register my son or daughter for classes out at Issaquah? So it feels good that we're making progress. I do have to share that, you know, when I came to work at Bellevue 2 years ago, as the business person on campus, and my first day, the interim president said, well, Ray, did you know that we're building a second campus? And I said, well, I didn't know that. That's fantastic. And I said, where is it? She described it, and she described this beautiful site. And I said, that's amazing. What are we going to do out there? And she said, I don't know, you're the capital guy. And so that set me back. So there was even expectations among our board that things would move really fast, and we just built this sucker. And it turns out that this is probably, and so I'm going to give you some of my expectations, and then turn it over to my brain trust over here. I would expect for this full build out to happen in phases, 3 or 4 phases over the next 20 plus years. And there's some reasons for that. Let's see. Before I get into that, though, I do want to say, after kind of going through this and seeing these again, it's actually been a little while since I've been working on this hands-on. So there's nothing I would change. We love that there's wetlands right next to our property. We love how we've designed it so we don't take up as much of, we disturb as little as possible, and we keep the sightless screening and that sort of thing. I love the neighborhood that we're going into. I love how we're planning to integrate with that neighborhood, because one of the things that when we're doing our early programming that keeps coming up is innovation and using a second site for the college to not just recreate Bellevue College and the mothership and a mini Bellevue. Nothing wrong with Bellevue, but we could do something really cool out there as far as pedagogy and different more innovative learning and teaching going on out there. So lots of cool ideas kind of percolating on campus right now. I'll talk a little bit more about those too. But that includes us integrating with the community more and the environment around us. The next thing I want to tell you, so the only thing I would change is those power lines. Not sure how that helps us, but except maybe for parking in the future. That is kind of a big question mark. I guess that as I hear Lucy talk about the plan, and I know that probably you get these things with a little more detail and a little more immediacy, so that there is detail to hear. So there's probably some flexibility on your part in looking at plans that are more conceptual, like this one is. Anyway, lots of excitement around that. I'm going to go to my notes to make sure I cover everything Dan told me to cover. The need is the next thing on here. So why do we need a second campus? Well, Bellevue's growing, and it has grown right through the economic crisis we've had, and while other colleges in our system, there's 34 community and technical colleges, are experiencing declines right now, Bellevue's holding flat or growing in a lot of areas, including areas that really impact your communities, like Running Start students and a lot of our technical degrees and that sort of thing, workforce stuff. The fact is, Bellevue's district, and I won't go into a big explanation, we draw students from all over the place, from Seattle and Everett and all kinds of things, but We are only allowed to market ourselves in a certain district, so I can't poach students from another college's backyard. But our district is huge. It goes all the way up. Index is in our district. I don't know how we're going to serve Index. I'm not planning a campus there anytime soon. But to the east, this is where all the development is happening, and the growth and the need that we see coming from, well, a large part your high schools, but also just a general population for us, serving lifelong learners. For us, our district goes all the way up. We say it goes to Chair 3. That's the outside, our easternmost part. So it's always been, I can't say that, I haven't been there for always, but it's been for a long time in our strategic planning that as we have growth, we need to provide services east. And the time is now. We have space on our main campus. We're not landlocked. We have done some land banking, and we could continue to put up buildings there to accommodate our growth. But at some point, community colleges, which are designed to be commuter campuses and serve their surrounding communities, we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense to keep asking people to drive further to come to this center, or do we have enough critical mass to start investing in the community around? And the common logic so far has been, yes, we do need some other sites, and east is probably the place to go. So this will relieve some of the population on our campus. I can share with you that not 20%, but more than 15% of our students on campus come from Issaquah and areas east. So that's significant, and it's growing. So our programs, Dan wanted me to say, because everyone asked this, well, what are you going to teach out there? And that's a really thorny issue, and we started doing some initial programming and realized we don't want to mess this up. We want to do this right, and we want to think about what programs will be successful in the early phases of this when we have 2 buildings, and what are going to come along later when we have the critical mass to kind of do the full comprehensive community college. And there are some things that in my studies, so these are, again, kind of my expectations and opinions, would be successful right now. For example, any continuing education offerings that we currently do on our main campus, and we also have a site slightly north where we do continuing education. Those are easy to bring to Issaquah. In fact, I'm hoping to, even before we have anything built, start to, using lease space, offer those things right here in the community. Because that would be a good way to kind of test what works and so on. Other things that I think would be successful early are recreation and wellness programs because of our proximity to the wilderness and to the parks up there. I think that conference facilities is something that the college really lacks. We don't have, our theater holds 400, less than that, 3 something. We need space even for our own staff to meet together, and we constantly have interest in those sorts of things. So those would be early things. I think that the later programs that we'll be bringing out there, early on it'll be serving your high school students, because boy, you're cranking out a lot of high school students. One of the things that's driving how we think about our spaces is there's a lot of investment happening in STEM high schools, and we don't really have STEM colleges yet, and we're a little embarrassed actually about the facilities that these students are coming in expecting to have the quality of science and engineering and math facilities that they had in high school. We need to replicate at the college level too. So that's kind of seems like a theme so sciences might be a theme for this area. Also, definitely environmental sciences. Again, being good stewards of the wetlands and the forest around us, partnering with folks in your community to offer a more experiential learning for our students in the sciences. A good example of that is you don't have a lot of light pollution here. And in our designs, we are keeping the light pollution directed down towards our feet rather than up to the sky. And we have a fantastic telescope on our main campus that we really can't fully utilize because of the light pollution that we have there. So moving that out here might be one of the early things that we do as well. The timeline for this, I mentioned my expectations are, I'd be surprised if all of this was built out in 20 years, and I would expect it to be probably mostly built out, but really to get fully there, maybe a 30-year plan. So it's a long time horizon. Part of that is funding, and with the state, it's a competitive process with the state of Washington where I compete with, well, all of the institutions, state agencies, but specifically with my brothers and sisters in the community college district. And I would expect to get a state-funded building every 2 to 3 years. That will then compete with main campus or elsewhere, right? Because there's a lot of logic behind building another building right on main campus. And so what I would expect is we'd build new buildings here and then transfer that and do some remodeling of existing facilities there. So we can attain the growth. State funding isn't the only way to do this. So one of the reasons I think that, for example, continuing education and also the conference facilities, things like that, they can pay their own freight, and we can, there's a business model that will support the payments on something like that. So those things we might be able to do even without competing at the state level. I guess this last one, I want to talk about sustainability later. So I'm going to introduce the dream team. So Dan Dawson is an engineer who's been on our payroll at Bellevue for a couple of years now, helping us kind of foster this project forward. Chad Weiser is a planner from OTAC and has been very involved. And Jim Waymeyer is an architect, and this is kind of the team that helped us on campus at least pull these things together and gather input and that sort of thing. So who's next? Is it Jim?
Ray, can I ask some questions?
Sure.
Well, just, I'm curious if you have any, like commuter statistics, for instance, in your main campus, how many students are there? How many do you expect to have with full build out here? I think it was, I thought I saw 4,000 as a figure or something. And then how many maybe cars per student in the main? You know, so do you forecast that here? So how many additional cars does that mean? And then I'm sure Dan will have a part of that in the future, but I'm just trying to get an idea of how this might load up the transportation.
Yeah, I believe
So-
that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think maybe we can let them make the presentation, because if they don't speak to it, then I think probably it's the dream team as opposed to Ray
Okay.
Yeah.
that may have the answer.
I just look good.
A pretty face.
And anything else for me, though? Okay. Thanks. Jim?
This is perfect. I'm Jim Waymeyer with Canon Design and have been working with Ray and the rest of the Nightmare team for about 2 years. One of the things that I appreciate the most is that when the college was in the process of looking for a site for the branch campus, they didn't task me with the search, because I would have looked for something that was nice and flat, lots of nice, easy vehicular access to the site, and probably the last site that I would have recommended was one that was only 20 acres with nearly a 400,000 square foot entitlement of occupied space. And just to put that in context, if you are familiar with the Bellevue, the existing main campus, Ray, there's what, 650, 700,000 square feet of occupied space on the main campus? Yeah. If the main campus grew to 1 million square feet on its 100 acres, this site would still be twice as dense, occupied square feet per acre, as the existing campus. 130 feet of fall from one corner to the next, one access road that is a pretty consistent 15% grade. Stupid to pick this site, and I'm so glad they didn't ask my opinion, because this site is a treasure in the end, and for all of us who have had special experience with special places, the physical environment and its impact on the values and the culture of an institution that resides there, that belongs to that place, is one of the most endearing and valuable parts. And this site is really going to be the star of the movie that an awful lot of people will play back in their memories over time of a great place to be teaching or learning. We've been through a lot of the statistics and so on, descriptions of some of the features, but I just wanted to ask you to step back and kind of see the bigger picture of the equation that we were trying to solve on this side, and that I think has been solved pretty commendably. I don't know how many of you enjoyed your math analysis class in high school, but there was a part of it that was memorable for me called simultaneous equations. And the idea is that you've got all of these different equations, and there is one x that is the solution to all of them. And that's very much the issue that we were dealt with here. For any given aspect of the site, there are always 10 different ways to do it. But to solve all of the critical aspects of creating a wonderful, memorable, efficient, accessible campus, this thing is, even at its conceptual level of thinking, is pretty tight in terms of the way it all works together. And there were 4 main objectives that we intended to achieve in this. One is to solve access and accessibility, and certainly from the standpoint of getting vehicles and emergency vehicles in particular onto the site and off of the site in a safe and efficient way is a challenge. But there is also the accessibility side, and every time I look at one of our renderings of the site, it's just alive, because when you think of all of the different environments that we all encounter, imagining a college campus that is just alive from very early in the morning and often very late into the evening, with this ebb and flow of pedestrians moving around the site. And in the site with, what did I say, 130 feet of topography on it, the idea of creating accessible, safe, dignified ways for that ebb and flow of people to move across the site was of extremely high importance. The other issue is if they had listened to me and gotten themselves a nice flat site, we would have mowed down all the trees and just kind of had a nice, easy job here. Here, this site is contiguous with what I've often referred to as the forest primeval. You could step off of this site into the woods and sort of meander off to the east and come out somewhere near Cleellum. It is truly the threshold to the wilderness. And our intention, which on the one hand was consistent with respecting this edge condition to nature, but also consistent with the notion of a planned community, a tight urban environment with pedestrian scaled amenities and pedestrian scaled building design, and to do it in a way that preserved as much of the site in its existing or in a comparably restored state was another huge intention. The other is placemaking. In the creation of this thing, in the concept of building below-grade parking to create a plinth that creates open space and very logical and convenient access from building to building. It holds the promise of being memorable and valuable space, wonderful views and outlooks. And this system of buildings that we know will not be built all at once is conceived in a way that the critical mass of the amenity of open space will be created very early, and that the approach to this system of buildings and infrastructure will allow each incremental piece to be developed without creating hardships of use on the space that's already been developed. And last is the issue of the realizing the entitled building capacity and to create a system of efficient buildings. And consistent with all of the other objectives, the idea of creating a cluster of buildings where the proximities one to another are pretty tight, to create buildings typically 4 stories tall with an interior vertical circulation system that then connects typically to 2 more levels of parking below, keeps the movement between and within buildings extremely efficient, and from an accessibility ADA standpoint, safe and dignified movement within. So that's all I'm going to say, because we're really here to listen to you. Dan?
Yes,
You're on.
I'm hiding over here. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to be really quick. I'm going to talk about 3 things that I was advised always come up in these meetings, and that is traffic, parking, and drainage. And I'll be quick. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background so you understood what we applied when we made provision for them. The traffic analysis was done by the city back when the development agreement was being prepared. And as part of the development agreement, there was a environmental checklist that was done, and that analysis found that there's 2 intersections that would be adversely impacted by the development. One was the intersection of Issaquah Fall City Road and Highlands Drive, and the other one was the 15th and Park Drive intersection. And the recommendations were that a signal be installed at 15th and Park Drive. That's been done. And that there be some timing modifications to improve the performance of the Issaquah Fall City Road and Highlands Drive intersection. And I actually don't know if that's been done or not, but these also were impacts based on the build out of the campus. So that describes what the traffic impacts were anticipated to be and what was done about them. Parking, we based our parking projected needs on 2 studies that were done recently. One was a parking analysis at Bellevue College, and the other one was a parking analysis of University of Washington Bothell Cascadia Community College campus up in Bothell. And we used the information that they both generated was fairly similar, and we used that information and used our projected number of full-time equivalent students to come up with the total parking load, that 1,320 figure that Lucy told you about earlier. And that figure, using that falls kind of in between the minimum and maximum that are allowed by code for the site. So our plan with the parking is probably to front load it a little bit, because it's important that our first opening and our first couple years of operation, we're going to be trying to sell kids on coming to that campus. We don't want to create problems for them. But after each phase, when a new phase is implemented, we'll do an analysis and see what how the parking's been used and what we think we need in the future. Our goal will be to actually provide less than 1,320 parking spaces, because the reason would be because not as many single occupant vehicles will be coming to campus. Right now, we're kind of limited in options there because we don't currently have bus service. Bus service is down at the park and ride structure, And so, but over time, we have a lot of flexibility on our site in terms of how much parking we can provide. So I think parking won't be a problem. When the development agreement was prepared, the development agreement allowed the campus site to discharge, now I'm on drainage now, 4 acres of dirty runoff into the washed-out pond, undetained. And it also allowed us to discharge 3.5 acres of runoff from clean surfaces into the wetland to the west. So that's what our drainage plan is predicated off. There's an additional 3 acres of dirty surface that we will treat and infiltrate into the site. Each parking lot also includes a rain garden, so we pretty much complied with the city's requirements, but the condition requires us to do an analysis and provide a report, and we'll do that before the first phase is started. And that covers what I want to talk about. Ray, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up with sustainability, okay? We do have plans to have a sustainable operation out there, both in terms of a lot of things, recycling, that sort of thing, but we're also planning the buildings to have green roofs, rain gardens, as I mentioned, to treat surface runoff. We're going to recycle a lot of the stormwater runoff in the summertime to use for irrigation water, and that we have some detention facilities that are provided for stormwater runoff that will be kept full in the summertime. It'd be kind of operated manually based on forecasting and that sort of thing, so we have a source of water for irrigation. We plan on using a ground source for heating and cooling, and in terms of, with the wells in the ground or penetrations in the ground, which are much more efficient at heating and cooling. I think the existing campus has a number of them already in operation. They also have a highly programmed and efficient monitored source or program to heat and cool. And the college has a sustainability group and a sustainability leader on campus who probably gave me more heat about the number of parking stalls we were providing out here than anybody else did. With that, our presentation is pretty much wrapped up, and we're, pardon me?
Do you want to do the flyer?
I can do that. Well, let's see if I can do that. Let me see now. That is. This is a flyover of the campus. It stops periodically so you can take a look. North is now down,
College Drive at the south.
and this is College Drive right here. Lucy, one of your slides actually said there were 5 buildings. There's actually 6 buildings.
Oh,
And then this is the parking structure right here. 6 buildings plus the
yeah,
parking
yeah.
structure.
Thank you.
Can we go around? Are we all the way around?
Almost.
Let's see now. Maybe I don't know how to stop this thing. Chad, is there a way to stop it? Oh, there. Oh, okay.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Lucy, Ray, Jim, Dan. Nobody with more than 4 letters, interesting, for some reason. Must be a requisite of the job. Carl, yes. Nina. We will have public comment later on in the agenda, but I think I'd like to open it up for the commission for questions, comments, discussion amongst ourselves, and then we'll do public comment and close with more. So, kind of practical stuff right now? Yeah, any questions we've got of anything, I think, of the conditions that Lucy had, and questions from the applicant as well. Chantal, we'll start with you.
I 3
I guess, traffic-related, transportation-related comments or questions. One is still with that much structured parking, why still have that much open, impervious surface covered, a third, maybe a quarter to a third of the land covered in open air parking, when you have the type of situation where you could put everything structured.
Let me make sure I understand the question. You're asking why there's surface parking when we have
so
a
much of
parking
it
structure?
right next to, given that you have underground and then that old structure there, why still have so much of the site covered with open air parking?
Well, the surface parking only comprises about 10% of the total parking need for the facility. It's as much a matter of cost saving as anything else. What's the ratio, Jim? Surface space costs $5,000 and a structured space costs $25,000 or $30,000? We're actually very ambitious in the amount of structured parking that we're providing here. The state funding people don't like to provide funding for structured parking. And so it's just to try to reach a happy medium between the two.
Okay. Yeah, and it's appreciated that a lot of it is structured. I asked earlier, we have the bus loop there. What is being done to bring transit to the site, given the metro cuts that are now imminent? Overcrowded buses, and the fact that students should be taking the bus.
Well, we had a meeting with Metro and Sound Transit and the city. I think it was just, and us, the four entities. And, you know, Metro wasn't very encouraging about service simply because they were looking at cutting back service, not increasing
17%.
service. And we were encouraging them to take, I think, is it Route 200 that serves downtown Issaquah, that we would like to see that come up to Issaquah Highlands and service the campus. You know, I think that anything like that that's going to happen is going to have to become a reality, because the major entities that want the service kind of work together to get Metro to provide it, and probably have to, you know, provide some funding for it as well. That's the way I see it developing. The concern that Metro expressed is that before anybody's ready to really support it and fund it up to the Highlands, it may cease to exist down here because of the funding difficulties that they're dealing with now.
So you don't see yourself as being part of an agreement, so cost-sharing agreement or something with
no.
Metro too?
I think that the college would certainly be willing to consider that, and would like to be the beneficiary of it, and would encourage that. We were a little frustrated in planning this simply from the perspective that we were having to provide parking and roads and all that, maybe to a little more extent than we would have liked to, because we're not optimistic, at least in the near term, about having other options to get people on campus besides driving their cars.
Well, don't want to monopolize the questions here, but another area is biking. We have, you know, that path in the back, which is the King County Trail, which is a pretty nice biking, well-connected trail, but the only connection to that is pedestrian. What you were showing, that you're planning some kind of a pedestrian connection to it. Would it be not feasible to connect a biking path?
There is
That's the one, yeah.
This connection here,
Did- Is that pedestrian, or could it be both? or-
I don't think it's concluded as to what it would be. You know, there's no reason why it couldn't be a multipurpose trail, in my mind.
Okay, because College Drive is really steep, so
Yes.
going around that way would make it a lot more doable for bicycle.
That's why it meanders the way it does, is
Okay.
to try to reduce the effect,
Are there currently bike
Impact.
lanes on College Drive? I'm trying to remember when I went
Yes,
down. I thought there were.
yes,
Yeah.
there are.
Both College Drive and Park Drive have bike lanes, and the trail connects to where there are bike lanes in College Drive.
I do know it frosts up very nicely when it gets cold. I noticed that. That was a treat.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chantal. Michael?
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was next.
Just as a side, I think our bike lanes and paved trails are leading to our metro funding shortage, but that's my thought there. I have a general question for you. We're talking about getting money toward metro. How's Bellevue College? Where do their funds come from? Is it state sponsored? Is it a private organization? If they were to pay metro or things like that, I mean, is it state money going right back to municipality, or how does that work?
We're 27% funded by state allocation, which is probably a lot smaller than you were expecting for a state agency. We do contract learning, so basically the state funds us to serve 7,500 FTE at the main campus, well, as a unit. We are presently serving about 1,150, so we for each of those students, we get the state-funded portion, plus we get what they pay at the window. So for those extra ones, we call them excess enrollments, that's just, we get less money for them, but it is cash at the window, and it helps us put things together. And then we also, other contract learning that's pretty, that helps us with the budget is international students and Running Start, actually. So there's other smaller venues. We're given the facilities and the infrastructure and the people, and they said, well, serve the 7,500 students that the taxpayers have tasked you with, and if you can make money hook or crook any way you can, go do that. So we rent our facilities for weddings, and we, church services, and we sell T-shirts in the bookstore. All of that kind of goes into the pot to kind of make up the nearly $100 million annual operating budget of the college. Anything that we could contribute would necessarily come from those locally generated things, the T-shirts we sold, the business enterprises. I run a bookstore, I run the food services on campus, and even a child care center. However, those are revenues that go right back into our mix. Since we're a not-for-profit, that's money we could be using to serve the students that we already have. So that's a trade-off for us when we look at, could we help with transportation? What's the greatest need for our students?
And then I have one other question.
Yeah.
It's about the traffic studies, reading the awesome pamphlet that you guys prepared on page 11, TAC 2 or 2 TAC 2. Well, it just talks about the University of Washington Bothell campus, and you referenced it, and then the Bellevue College parking management analysis, coming up with the parking ratio for full-time employees there.
Right.
And it comes up with a number of 0.3 for this campus, and you have 0.32, and where is it?
0.28 was the other one.
0.28 for the other campuses. And I think it's great that you guys have these numbers here, but being familiar with both those campuses, they have something that's quite a bit different. UW Bothell has dormitories and live-on students, so I think that changes the makeup of how those parking stalls are utilized or how the students are there. And then your Bellevue campus has the I-90 Transportation Center within walking distance there.
Right.
Having taken the bus there, I see how great of a resource that is here. So those are good numbers to reference, but I think this build out would be a little different, and we may actually have different parking needs. And for me, that makes me want to have a more robust parking environment where we can provide those people who will be driving cars here, for the most part, having a spot to park. So I'm one of the parking proponents, I guess you could say. So I look at those numbers and say they're great, but it's different. It's a different environment.
I agree. It is a different environment. But I would say that we don't need the full complement of parking until the campus is built out. And that's a long ways in the future, and, you know, how things have changed from 1980 to now is we're probably going to see even more drastic changes in transportation between now and 30 years from now. I hope, anyway. I'd like to see that myself. More availability of public transportation, basically more transportation options is what I'd like to see. But we also have a lot of flexibility in what we can do on the site. We will build a higher ratio or more parking spaces per student in the first phase. We're very mindful of the concern about our parking encroaching in the park or in the neighborhoods, and we absolutely don't want that to happen. And that's why it's really important for us to study it each time we get ready to develop a new phase and make sure that we're providing enough parking. You know, it's a fine line you walk. You don't want to encroach on the neighborhood, but you also don't want to make it too easy for people, for every single student to drive their own car to campus. You'd like to see people use other transportation choices. So that's what we're going to be focused on.
Okay, and one other question, will the parking be controlled or paid at the campus? Will it be decals, those sorts of things? Because I see that Central Park is right next to it, which has plenty of free parking, and that is a very utilized parking area for the residents of the Highlands already. And if we were to create any situation that limits the availability of that parking by forcing people to pay on Bellevue campus, it might be, again, a difficult situation, so.
The idea has been suggested by the sustainability people, you know, and we've kind of resisted it just for those reasons, because we don't want to do anything to drive parking off the campus. But you know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I can't predict what'll happen.
I think I'm supposed to be able to have my car turn into an attaché case, is how I remember the Jetsons doing that. Eric, you had a question?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions. In looking at the site, I just want to get some feedback or what any thoughts are. Obviously, main access sounds like it's going to be Park Drive. Come into Central Park, is that the name of the street you come into, or?
I think the expectation is Park Drive, then 15th, and then College Drive.
Right.
So 15th, if you could show where is that south or west?
Oh, here, let me, well, let's see, let's get on an area one. Go ahead, you want to drive? Okay, you drive.
So is 15th like going through those apartments?
Yes,
Yes.
it's where the new signal was installed at
Okay,
Park.
so that's my question, because
Right here.
I was in the area, both 15th and then also I think it's called Northeast Falls Drive, which sort of goes through a fairly tight neighborhood right there, which I can imagine kids playing at. And so, and then 15th is extremely narrow.
Falls Drive is
So,
So are there any plans or any thoughts in that area at all?
down here, right?
so this is Falls Drive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So this is an option, but the expectation is that it would be Park Drive to 15th and then up to College Drive.
Okay, so yeah, I just expressed some concerns in regards to that. It just seems like 15th goes through a fairly tight apartment complex right there. And then the other option, Northeast Falls Drive, is a fairly, you know, secluded kind of neighborhood almost, where that road's not expected to be real thoroughfare. And it's going to be, I think, a stark change, you know, to accommodate a college campus. So I just think some thought needs to be put into that. And I would imagine that people are going to go Northwest Park Drive and then come down into Central Park. You sort of have some of the parking that possibly will happen with the BPA. That road, too, is extremely narrow. And so I just wonder if there's some plans, if that's the case, to use that drive to expand that road or not.
Okay? We'll,
Just
yeah, put
Yeah.
that into the memo.
Is that related to that?
Yeah, also I'd like to echo Eric's concerns as well, that 15th Drive is an extremely narrow passageway through a heavy residential apartment complex to get to College Drive. So I think this vision is fantastic from the perspective of the campus and what is to be. I do have reservations, however, about the accessibility and the major thoroughfares to get up to the property. So 15th, case in point, Forest Ridge, if you're looking to redirect traffic up, that's a very dense residential neighborhood now, with very narrow passageways as well, parking on the, parking on the street through that passageway. And then, of course, when we looked at Park Drive, we have heavy traffic, of course, going up into the Highlands. And if the intent is to make a right-hand turn to travel southbound on Central Park Drive, again, a very narrow passageway with heavy pedestrian utilization to Central Park and all the activities, the sports complexes that are up there. So I would just ask, as we move forward with this process, what's our vision for accessibility and how can we accommodate those increased volumes considering the heavy pedestrian utilization and those thoroughfares?
Yeah, I agree, Scott, and traffic is like water. It's going to find the least resistance, and it's going to go there no matter what we design and plan and model. It's just going to go where it can find it. So that's a concern I share as well. Along those lines, I was wondering about, during the traffic studies, this is not your typical business-oriented, heavy commute in the morning, heavy commute in the afternoon. Do you have something that shows what it looks like during the day? Because we talked about 900 plus peak trip hours as a threshold that we're looking at. But what about during the day, which is different than a lot of places we see?
We used, when the development agreement was being prepared, we had traffic counts taken on the main campus for a little over a week and used that data to help us with projections and to do the analysis of impact of the development. The peak on the main campus occurs at noon. And it's interesting, it's not, the peak isn't nearly as much in the morning and afternoon peaks on other roadways as it is at the noontime on campus.
Thanks, Dan. I wondered about that, if it, it sort of balances out almost with the traffic, so, in some regards, unless you're trying to get to lunch. Other questions, Jim?
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess just a comment that this just seems really unique for an urban village. Certainly, I don't have necessarily the history and the knowledge, but I don't know if you've seen anything like this in other urban villages. Maybe a comment on that, but I think it's a great addition, to the concept of urban village. A question that I would have is, are they required to have a secondary access, just like the neighborhoods, et cetera?
So they do have the two access points off of College Drive, and and we checked with the fire department that if they did not, the Central Park Spur Road was not built, did they have a concern, and they said no.
So will that be a lockbox type access?
No, I mean, if we're able, if the negotiations allow it, it would just be a regular road. But it may not happen at all. I mean, that's just an option and an alternative on the table.
So you're saying without that, it's the upper and lower loop road, I think you referred to
Right,
it,
it's
or
just
the
that
access points?
one loop road.
So they aren't required to have a secondary access?
Well, the reason I'm not saying that is because I don't think that's the way the fire department looks at it. I think because there are two access points that can be approached from two different directions and multiple roads, I think their feeling is that there's multiple access points. I understand why you might not say it that way, but I think that's the way they look at it.
Okay, so ingress, egress could be from a single point.
No,
It's two places.
there's 2
You're saying
points
it's not
onto
from a
College
single
Drive.
point. You have the upper roundabout, which would take you out, get out
Here.
to Park
Yep.
Drive. You would have the lower
there's
point,
an
which would
access
drop
point
you
here.
down to
Okay.
College and Falls.
Okay, so is what I'm getting at is off of the Central Park Drive. Is that called Central Park Drive? What is it? It
The
is.
Drive.
road at the north?
The central.
Or,
sorry.
you mean that little road that goes off towards Central?
Little Road being the key. Anything on that, it seems to me, would require a redesign of that road. I mean, as it is, I think it's the worst thing in Issaquah Highlands right now.
You're talking about this connection over
Yeah.
here, right?
Including the roundabout, which
Yeah.
almost requires a compact.
I would frankly expect that if that connection were made, that roundabout would be reconstructed to higher standards.
And the road that goes,
Um,
I think the road is more important.
I haven't actually measured the width of it, but you know, the thing about Issaquah Highlands is the emphasis is on narrow roadways. And, you know, to make them more pedestrian friendly, to keep speeds down and that sort of thing. So,
I think it's more residential roadways. You know, narrow residential roadways, and these are not residential roadways.
well, College Drive, you know, was built 2 9-foot lanes, 2 5-foot bikeways for a total width of 28 feet.
And there's
And
residential.
that's not a
in
residential
there.
roadway, really.
So, you know, I think, I appreciate what you're saying about Central Park, and I think that that's where sitting down with the Parks Department that has a lot of experience using that park and what their sense of adding this connection would mean, that would be part of the discussion that we'd have to have. And, you know, building on their experience.
Eric?
And I just wanted to start out actually earlier to just express my appreciation for Bellevue College coming to the Issaquah Highlands. And I do think this is a fantastic opportunity for both the college and the city. And, you know, so I just didn't want to lead with the concern with the drives, but it is a concern that I have. And I'm sure a resolution will be found. So thank you.
It's a good concern.
Mr. Beard?
Guys, we are talking about, or we've talked about the BPA easement there. I know you can't tell us obviously if it's going to, I mean, you don't know if it's going to happen or not, but is there a pretty good sense that this is going to occur? Is there any history on this that you could let us know about?
As far as this particular application is concerned, there isn't any sense. But I did actually get a call from BPA today acknowledging that they had received the preliminary application, asked me some questions. I sent them some additional information. I had a very pre-application conversation with them on the phone, and you know, they didn't just turn me down. You know, they said, well, here's what we need, and here we'll send you the forms. And I have, you know, there's lots of places where there's parking and access developed underneath the overhead high voltage lines. So I don't think, as long as we don't impede their ability to take care of their facilities, then, you know, that's always their first concern.
Okay.
So I want to add a couple of things, because there's sort of while BPA is probably the 800-pound gorilla, there are a number of other parties, and you know, we've already mentioned the Parks Department and their, you know, opportunities, concerns, discussion there. As part of this development agreement, there was a mountain bike skills course anticipated about where this parking is. And that's the sort of split rail fencing you saw along the trail. At this point, that's sort of the extent of it. We've received some of the funds for it. Tony Cowan, who some of you know, and who was featured in the Sunset Magazine Best Burb article on Issaquah. We've sat down and talked to him because he is kind of a good contact relative to the mountain bike skills course. You may have noticed in the application that Bellevue College showed it in the forested area between the BPA and the campus. That use is not currently allowed in the forested area. However, since they are preserving parts of their campus, it may be possible to exchange land. And so all I'm saying is there's a whole number of moving pieces related to this. And it's not just one party that would say yay or nay, but a whole series of kind of chess pieces that have to get moved around. And given the funding and design and some of the things that come in phase one, there's some time to work through those pieces, which I think we'll have an opportunity to see if it's possible or not.
So the mountain bike is a city of Issaquah thing?
That land is currently City of Issaquah. It's supposed to go to King County, and I don't know when that land transfer would occur.
Okay. And then I'm looking at the phasing plan here, and like you just mentioned, it's going to be a long project. So would the mountain bike, if they do decide to move that, would we have to wait like 10 years to get that, or would we have a place for that sooner?
To get the mountain bike skills
Yeah.
course? Well, if it was to move, I mean, there's that one option of moving it into the forested area potentially. But there's also been discussion of some of the different pads that the park department has, and do they have any interest and willingness to have it on some of their land? So, I mean, we're exploring a number of options. So I guess the short answer is there's no expectation that the mountain bike skills course is going away. It's just a question of, is there another suitable home?
One last question. In the building of your campus, do your building numbers coincide with, the sequence of your building intent, or is that just arbitrary?
No, they were numbered based on what we thought might be the development sequence at the time they were numbered. Now, I don't want you to cast that in stone
No, I know.
because
There was some spirited argument and debate over which would be number 3 and 4.
plus, it could be influenced by if there was a special need. For instance, environmental sciences program, it could be that building 3B, which is technically, by this numbering system, the last one to be built, might be an earlier building. It kind of depends on things like that.
I also didn't hear anything about medical education. It was just a curiosity with another plan that we saw that's outside of the purview of this. It was a question I couldn't stand not asking.
Yeah, that was kind of an obvious first choice for us to look at with, considering our neighbors there. Is this a great place for our nursing program to relocate and that sort of thing? Unfortunately, the timing is a little weird for us in that we are coming out of the ground right now with a 70,000 square foot health sciences building. So it has radiation technology, nursing labs, phlebotomy, which the school newspaper quoted me as saying our lobotomy program. School newspaper. We don't have a lobotomy program. That's on the 3rd floor. So anyway, so we have quite an investment in science facilities right now with the fume hoods and the containers and the vacuum stuff. They're expensive, kind of entrenched on our main campus. So that kind of got, it's not that it wouldn't happen there, but it's kind of gotten shelved in the discussion, wasn't an immediate first mover.
Nina, you had some questions?
Practical ones. I'm looking forward to audience comments, but I have just a couple questions, I think, for Lucy. Lucy, on measuring building height, it seems development agreements vary, so can you give me a primer on how building height is measured on this site, considering the grade and all that kind of stuff, and we're talking about increasing the building height from 50 to 75 feet. So
And
to
do you
tell
have
me
pictures
where
of
the
balloons floating in the
No,
air?
but
I
really
don't
wanted
have
to
them,
see
but
those. Mike
Mike Martin can describe that if you're really interested about balloons. He was out in the field doing that, I believe. I believe that in this development agreement, it is more like Issaquah Highlands where it's average grade. And that, I think, was part of what drove the interest in the height, exercising the option to have the full heights, because your average, you may only have a 4-story building, but if you have a couple of floors buried into the ground that are exposed on one side, in your average, your building's much taller. So it's a series of points around the building that you measure the height from, and then you take the average of them.
Okay, and then,
No funky stories.
okay, and then the other question is, how long is the term of the development agreement that this is governed by?
So different uses have different lengths in this development agreement. Just thank Keith. And the institutional goes to 2040.
Kind of a cheater question because I was too lazy to look it up. The forested land that surrounds the Bellevue College, what is its ownership and status and zoning?
So just like the area where the mountain bike spills course is, currently the city owns that land, but the idea was that it would go to King County, and there's some kind of negotiation going on about that. I'm not a part of that, but the idea is that ultimately King County would own it. I'm not sure about the critical area to the west. I think that's part of it as well, but definitely to the south and to the east.
What is its designation?
It has a protection easement on it, a conservation easement.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
We'll open it up for public comment in just a moment. If there's anybody who'd like to make a comment, I'd ask that they sign up. David and anyone else in the audience? Mr. Kapler, thank you. Yeah, I think you've done this before. So, any other questions, comment? Tim, did you have anything down there? No. Nothing?
I have another question, actually,
Jim?
probably for Ray. Do you guys have any kind of programs incenting students to take public transit? I mean, when you threw out the cost of parking, it seems like you could do a lot to, to get students maybe to use public transit.
Yeah, we subsidize their bus passes through the Orca Pass program to a certain degree. Part of what we've done on campus for employees and for students is initiate parking fees. And an alternative transportation program to work effectively, that seems to be kind of a critical thing. So that's kind of as we were talking about earlier, that's a rough one. I don't think we could just telegraph that from the main campus out to here and say, hey, it's $65 a quarter for students to park at the main campus. We ought to have equity on our Issaquah campus. I don't think we can afford to do that, at least, right away. So there are ride incentives, and we have our sustainability office and director do ride matching and small incentives along the way, but the big one is subsidizing the Orca Pass.
And I may not be able to answer your follow-up question, but there is this maximum on the PM peak trips, and then there is a requirement that they come up with those kinds of actions to keep it below that number.
One of the things that I didn't get to say, if I can, because it kind of relates, I'll use this opportunity. When we're designing and programming on our campus, or what we'd like to see out here, we learned a lot about sustainability and the sustainability measures that we would want to include. The state requires us to build a LEED silver. We go to gold or platinum in our new construction. And our transportation, in the actual construction of the space, not using as much land or of the land as, leaving as much as we can untouched, are all, we learned a lot about how we would like to develop Issaquah campus. That is now we kind of wrote a manifesto about, what is our commitment to sustainability, and that's actually being telegraphed back to the main campus. The tail's wagging the dog a little bit there. So I would not expect us to be using alternative energy up there in a very real way, but as a demonstration, feasible, you know, looking for ways to do that. We talked earlier about using the water, the soil, the trees, the wetlands areas as kind of a living laboratory for our environmental sciences. And
Ray, sorry to interrupt, but didn't you
Yeah.
mention geothermal?
yes,
Isn't
Yeah.
that an alternative energy source?
I suppose that is. Yes, and that would be definitely, we've tested for that, and I think it's a viable opportunity with all of these buildings, and something we're already doing on the main campus. Alternative transportation is a tough nut to crack, and I think here would be even more challenging, but it is something we'd be very interested in pursuing where it's feasible.
I have one last question, Lucy. This might be for you, and
Okay.
let me preface this by I love this design, or I guess Ray and team, I love this design. Did we not once upon a time see a more wooded version where the buildings were spaced out in the woods? Am I remembering that? And it's all a moot point, but is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember bringing you something, but,
No, it wasn't for approval. Maybe it
or
was just
maybe it
discussion.
was maybe it was something that showed up in the newspaper.
Oh, well, then has to be correct. It was either that or the internet, so. Dan told me no, so I'll just stop right now. So, thank you, everyone. Any more questions from the commission? So thanks, staff, for all the hard work, and thank you from Bellevue College. And like I say, I love what I see. I share a lot of commission's concerns about the access, the roads and the traffic. That's, I think, a common concern that we've seen where we've been able to absorb it, but that's I do see that coming up and down here. And like I say, traffic is like water. It's going to look for the cracks. So we're probably going to learn a lot about hydrology here in the future. Time for public comment, and then we have some business items to take care of, correct?
Is there no discussion after public comment?
I think we can, yeah. Yeah, let's hear public comment, and then I'm going to whisper at Lucy.
Would it be possible to have the site and context map up there?
Oh, sure. Let's do this. Like that?
Thank you. Good.
And if you could just use the mouse to point, if you want to
Okay.
point it. Oh, yeah, it sure did.
Property, and I don't know how I did that. I liked it where it was before.
Yeah, let's see.
I'm good. I was having trouble there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. David Kapler, 255 Southeast Andrews Street. First, make a few comments as, I guess, as myself, and then later as president of the Squaps Trails Club. Over at, there's a construction condition number 59, talks about the sewer line being in the open space, like right there or something. It does get across the headwaters of the wetland there, 23. But west of the the wetland, the dry utilities all end. And there's no condition mentioned about the need. You're going to either cut through and dig through the end of the wetland, or you're going to have to go down and under. Dan might know. In the roadway. Or cut it to go out through the roadway. So there's going to be some work there. But I think that should be mentioned, that to get the dry utilities to this site, it's going to take some going back into the roadway. The green roof idea is great, but I think the opportunities of leaks in green roofs and chasing that down, I'm not sure it's worth the risk and the investment of a green roof. I think there's other ways we could get as much or greater at much less cost environmental benefit on the ground rather than green roofs. But that's just my thought at it. It's bad enough on flat roofs. This roof has a sump pump on it, in fact. Access to I-90. I'm up at this site, was up there a whole bunch in late December doing digging up ferns off of the Issaquah property that the city has replanted down in here. From I-90, from downtown Issaquah, you go up. You don't go up Discovery because that's too steep. You go to the next one, you go past Dix, you make a left turn, then you make a right turn on Falls. That's how a lot of people from I-90 are going to be going there, even when the rest of that is built up, and I think that's realistic. Now, for bicycle riders especially, they're going to be interested in coming more that way and getting to the campus on using the trail and coming through here. If they're coming from anywhere south or even from the west, they're going to have a high interest of coming the trail and into the college site. That is a mighty steep hill. And if you do the lower road and you have to do that to make it kind of flat where it enters College Drive, you're going to have to make even College Drive even steeper in places to do that. If you can have it sloping entrance to it and not have to change the grade a bunch of College Drive at the lower road, that's another thing. And that's going to be interesting how they work that out, because College Drive is steep. Okay, switching roles here as president of the Issaquah Trails Club. The 100-foot strip in here was very intentional to have that as a forest and have that as a visual break from the residents to the east. That was very intentional. The idea of trying to, and the bike park was put out in an area, was anticipated being in an area where it was highly visible, because you were talking about kind of middle school age kids, a lot of that kind of thing, and having visibility to it. So the siting of that was intentional. Also, there's intentions of having some vertical type filled dirt mounds or whatever and structures within the bike park. You can't just do that in a forest. And even if you just have lots of intensive trails in the forest, the long-term health of those trees might be an issue, and that we want to keep that forest there for a long time. So that's a problem. This 43 acres of open space came about as part of the Park Point and the WSDOT agreement. It's got a conservation easement on it that is very strong and very much limits what can happen, even under the area that's impacted by the BPA, but especially around these wetland areas and that. So it's not just a simple matter of the park department saying you can change it or BPA. Now, I'd love to see some kind of trade. You've got to keep the 43 acres in here in open space because it's a 4-to-1 TDR. If the college wanted to give up some of their forests they're planning to keep up there and put that into the permanent conservation easement in exchange for the land over here, that would be a win-win for everybody. I don't have a problem with that. I would encourage that and endorse that. It's getting more real forest and in exchange for land under the BPA that's pretty impacted and not much of a habitat, although the deer are there every night in the summer, I swear. That's a possibility. Fortunately, as I've said, they don't have to do this right away to make this the college work for initial buildings. But the Issaquah Trails Club would be very interested in working with that. We worked for over 20 years to get Park Point and this was all part of the Park Point deal, and we would still keep high interest in this. It's been referred to as the King County Trail. King County has not accepted that trail or that land yet. The trail does not meet anybody's standards for a multi-use trail because of the grades and the sharp corners and things like that. So that's been in limbo for years now, and it's still got a ways to go before King County. But King County needs to be worked with on those trail connections that need to occur. Especially, as I mentioned, skinny tire bikes, the people commuting, if they're on skinny tire bikes coming in here, they're going to need paved access up into the campus. When they're coming down through those grades and the sharp turns shown on that one trail, you need to be looking at separation of those bikes from pedestrians. There was a mitigated determination of non-significance. It was part of the TDR agreement. It's actually in the TDR agreement, so I assume those conditions, the 50 conditions in the MDNS, completely apply here. Interpretive trail. There's an area here that's quite flat, nice forested area between the two wetlands. It would be an ideal site for an interpretive trail, both for college education and just the general public. And I hope over time we can be working on that. And one thing that would be nice, it could be a pedestrian-only trail in the woods, which would be the only such trail in the Highlands. Right now, if there's a lot of speed on all the other trails and all the other places, or they're not in the woods. Here you got a chance for a pedestrian trail where you can take your grandkids or your dog on a leash and not be trying to dodge bikes, and the bikes don't have to be there dodging you, and have interpretive signs or QR codes or whatever at the different sites where you learn all about certain trees, plants, and the rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kapler. Any other voices wishing to speak, be heard? Dan Irvin, no? Any more questions, comments from the commission on anything? Nina, why don't we, if that's okay with you, Scott?
Scott, you want to go first? Okay. Good. I didn't need to. So I have 4 things that I wanted to bring up that are, I feel I need to spend more time with. I'm prefacing by saying these are things that I think should be part of the SDP so that I'm prepared for the next meeting. I want to bring those up. But before I do, I want to thank Bellevue College for the wonderful submission, the thorough documentation, the enthusiasm, the group of people. My first college was Bellevue College. Actually, it was Bellevue Community College at the time. But yes, but I'm still fond of it and glad to have you here. And I do want to say that some of the topics that folks have been talking about are traffic and transportation impacts on the neighborhoods. And those things aside, there are reasons why I have sometimes thought that this could be located somewhere else. I'm not looking for a flat place in particular, but I always wanted to leverage the great impact that a college has on a community and leverage it for the rest of the for an area that could make use of it. And up here we have an elementary school and a bunch of houses. There aren't any cafes up here except if you go up a little, it's a hike anywhere. And so the business community can't take advantage of the college location where it is right now. And I just have hoped, and I kind of still hope, that there would be some way that the Bellevue College could play a part in our economic development that way too. It will be a great impact on its own. I want to throw that out there because that's something I've been talking about since the very beginning. But practically speaking, on paper, Lucy, page 8 or 30, I don't know what it is, page 8 or 30, where we're discussing how this is incomplete and there might be inconsistencies and conflicts and things happening over time, and we're going to approve a SDP for this application, but things are going to change quite a bit over time. It's a 20, 30-year build-out. So I wanted to ask, why are we approving an SDP for something that is so big and that will change and that we don't have any oversight over, and why don't we approve it in a phased way so that we get to see what's actually going to be built and what we're actually approving?
So I don't think it says that there's going to be a lot of change over time. I mean, part of what we're doing as part of them putting an application forward, us writing a staff report, making a presentation, is identifying sort of the key elements that are, that make this an appropriate, consistent with the development agreement. And our expectation is that there is some flexibility and there'll be some refinement, but I don't think we're looking that if there are big changes, then we're coming back to you. In terms of why we're doing this all at once is I think that there is a lot of planning and design that they're going to do to strategically set up all the pieces, which may not happen in a sort of logical, say, north to south fashion, and this allows them to go away, work with the different programs, work with funding, work with parking implementation, et cetera, wherever they need to in the site to implement it.
One down. Building heights. There's an increase of building height from 50 to 75 feet, and as you mentioned earlier, this is based on the average ground level, but it is also predicated, I don't know if that's quite the right word, on surrounding building tree height. And we've talked about the property directly to the east. And if we have a building height increase to 75 feet and we say we're doing that because there are trees on 3 sides and on the north side it's just Nina's house and she doesn't mind looking at a college, which I don't. But I wonder if there should be a tighter way of, and that's where I need to go back, or if you can help me find how those two things are hooked together in the conditions, so that if we raise the building heights to 75 feet and then something else allows the trees to go away, then we will have missed the point of why we allowed it. And I'm thinking particularly on the property on the east.
So I don't think there was an expectation that the trees would go away on the property to the east. If the mountain bike skills course went there, it would be in between the trees. So it would be more about what was happening on the ground plane. But I don't know that because we want the trees, I don't know that we're thinking that that is a good location. It's just simply a location that we've talked about. Because that screen, I think at this point, is still expected to be there.
And I liked Mr. Kapler's creative off-the-cuff thinking that, you know, if there are forests to preserve, there may be better ones, and the one in the east might not be as quality a forest. So what I'm saying is that are we increasing the building height because there are forests on 3 sides? And if that is the criteria, then I think that the SDP should say it. That's what I'm saying. Okay, and then I wish we had time to talk about the increase in square footage and saying that because we have a rule for residential units that they can have accessory units, that we can increase the square footage that was originally allocated to this land, because some of the uses will be accessory and some of them will be institutional. Accessory dwelling units have another function in planning to increase density of housing on property, and this is a commercial development. I like having the campus densified, but it just didn't, it seemed like an arbitrary, well, maybe we could do it this way, you know, and it just didn't seem to make a logical connection between residential planning and commercial planning.
So I think the one thing I would say is that it wasn't, I think it was trying to figure out how you define the accessory uses, which, like in a residential setting, support your activities. On a institutional, they're allowed the 372,000 square feet. The accessory uses are accessory, so they have to support it and not take away from it. But I think Carl was the one that made the point earlier that it can't just be allowed ad infinitum. So I think the important thing is that the uses are very specific, and that there has to be infrastructure to support it. And those two things are going to constrain what can happen.
Yeah, and my last one is that the mountain bike skills course has long been dream, hope, and then became institutionalized with the TDR. And I don't want to see it slip away, and I would like to see language in this SDP that shows that it can't just be removed for the sake of a road and then be accommodated somehow, maybe somehow later. If it's going to be changed, I don't want its fate to be completely removed and then be some afterthought and go looking for a home again. It took a long time to find this home. And we had this home, and it was firm, and I just think that that could be tighter in the way that we approve this SDP. Is that possible? Something to look at?
Well, the only reason I'm looking up is I'm thinking about what you're saying. I don't think that we're in a position to take its home away unless it has another home, because the development agreement says there's going to be this activity. So we can't eliminate it.
To Lucy's point, it didn't sound like it came across quite that strongly in discussion tonight, so if we
Okay.
could articulate that in the
Okay.
comments, I think that would
Sure.
be valuable.
Okay.
I agree.
Done. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Scott, I think you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. So I'll raise this as a question. And the question is, upon approval of the site development agreement, is there a vision or has there been any discussion around the land clearing process? And the reason I raise this up is that if we're talking about a 20 to 30 year build out agreement, I would hate to see the entire location cleared of trees and left barren while we do a phased development, right? So again, just raising this as a question now, what is the vision on approach for build out and the removal of trees?
So I'm going to answer just from the development agreement, and then they can answer sort of from their perspective. Once the land use permit is approved, they would want with a native plant sale, then they would be allowed to clear the entire thing, entire property. I mean, that's not their choice, but they would be allowed to do that. But they couldn't leave it unworked and open for longer than, I think it's 6 months. I will go back and get the exact language. So from a constructability, there can be advantages to clearing all the land you want to clear at one time for logging and sales and things. But you couldn't leave it where you're going to have problems with erosion or establishment of invasives and things like that. You would have to both stabilize and maintain it.
Just to give you a little bit of insight, you know, our desire would be to clear no more than we need to clear. But at the same time, there's enough earth moving around the site that you also have to take into consideration what you have to achieve a balance in your cut and fill and that sort of thing. So that kind of drives you. We have talked about ideas like using some of the cleared but not yet built-on area, if that should occur, as a tree farm, or, as a nursery for future trees. Because, what happens when you develop a campus like this is you plant materials, and then 5 years later, you build another phase, and the materials here, then the new phase are small, and the ones in the old phase are more mature. And it's nice if you can try to, keep a similar level of maturity throughout the development of campus. Things like those are the ideas we have. It may be desirable to, going from one phase to another, to stockpile some material somewhere, because you're going to want to use it later. I kind of think that's unlikely, because my sense is that we'll have to export because of all the excavation being required for the garages under the buildings, that we'll wind up with a net export of material off the site. But, we have to live there too. And we don't want to create a nuisance, an eyesore for our students and our faculty any more than we want for the neighborhood.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Tim?
In that regard, would you expect that the upper and lower loop roads would be like number one on the list of areas to be cleared and constructed in order to establish that portion of the project?
It depends. We have moved ahead in the last 18 months anyway, with the thought in mind that the first phase would be 2 buildings. But then when you get really close to doing that, then the realities of all the costs come down, and then you start thinking, well, what if you built 1 building? This is not a commitment by any means, but my guess is that if we did build a 2-building first phase, we would build the entire loop road. If we built 1 building, then we may build a piece of the loop road, and not the entire thing.
Thank you.
Kind of
Jane?
a follow-up on Scott's question. You got to stay there, sorry. A couple of times it's been mentioned that there's going to be more parking stalls at the beginning of the project. Do I interpret that to mean that you're going to build one of the structures, or does that just mean that some of the land will be paved?
Closer to the latter. The parking under the buildings is going to pretty much be dictated by what the building footprint is. And so if it's a 2-building first phase, it would be the parking that was planned under those 2 structures. So, but that wouldn't deliver enough parking in total for the first 2 buildings. So we would build some surface parking to support that. What it would be some or all of the proposed surface parking, plus more than likely surface parking where the proposed parking structure would go eventually. That would start out as surface parking. And what I meant by for the first phase is because we don't know anything about how this campus is going to be used, other than the information we've gathered from other campus operations. We would be inclined to provide more parking spaces per full-time equivalent student in the first phase than we would in future phases, just to make sure that we don't drive anybody into the neighborhoods of the park before we know how the parking is being utilized.
So is it safe to assume then that the parking structure itself will be one of the last things to be?
It would more than likely be beyond the first phase. Because, the problem with the first phase, if you had a 2-building first phase, is you have the whole loop road cost, you have a lot of infrastructure costs that drives that first phase cost up, and Ray commented how difficult it is to fund these things, and so that's the challenge that we face, is finding that happy medium.
Chantal?
I'd like to ask a follow-up since you kindly came back to the microphone. I think you asked earlier about the incentives to not drive, and you mentioned the discussions about the cost of parking, of charging to park. Did you say that you currently pay to park in at the Bellevue campus?
Yes, they pay to park at Bellevue campus. Chad Bothell started charging a few years ago, right? Yeah, it was for 7 years, it was free in the Bothell campus, and then they started charging for
So
parking up there.
Bellevue has a huge park and ride right next door
Yes.
where it's free. What type of enforcement, and there's signs everywhere that say no Bellevue students, no BC students parking. What kind of enforcement do you use there, and why would that not be possible to use the same thing in Issaquah?
Ray needs to address that, I don't know about that.
Parking is so emotional on our campus. We don't really have enforcement in the park and ride. We have signs, and we look for students with or people with backpacks.
It's on tape now.
Yeah.
Oops.
Students with, or people with backpacks leaving the park and ride will, our public safety will talk to them and such if they're noticed, but we don't really wind up having those interactions with students. There is, anecdotally, it's suspected that some of our students are parking in there.
I've seen them.
And that's true of the neighborhood too. It's difficult because the fact is, we don't really have to charge for parking, because if we don't, it's a zero-sum game financially with not being a for-profit organization. If we don't charge for parking, we charge a little more for books, and and whatever we charge for parking goes back to serving students anyway. So the motivation really is to charge enough that it stings,
Right.
that someone's going to say, well, maybe I shouldn't drive my car every day. But not so much that we drive people into the neighborhoods, and so we experiment all the time with more structural passive ways. For example, at our outer lots, we charge $15 less. Most of our students are okay with $65 a quarter. It comes out to like $2 a day or less, $1.75, I think, and it's worth it to park closer to their classroom for most of our students.
If I can just add to your question, the park and rides are monitored by the King County Metro Security. They're the ones that enforce parking regulations in those park and rides. But
Yeah, that makes sense, but I guess the point of my question was still that, to me, it's, if you're going to be putting such a heavy traffic facility in the middle of an urban residential area, that everything should be done to really incentivize the students, faculty, users to be using alternative transportation. And if Metro is not it, then other solutions, other ideas should be explored. To me, it's a really big. 900 trips is huge.
Yes.
It's on small roads in a residential area. Anything should be done to avoid that, and from the start to incentivize them to have different behavior.
I agree, and our practice is try things out, tweak them, adjust things, and try and be equitable in how we do that. There's no good decisions in that. There's winners and losers in each of those scenarios. So I think it would be very different, though, because of the location and the environment that they're in, the types of strategies we would use on this campus as opposed to the main.
Thanks, Ray. Michael, before we get to you, I'm going to ask Lucy a question. Do we have more discussion at the next meeting on this? Is that the intent, or what's the?
So we'll go away, write a briefing response memo, send that to you, and respond to your questions. So, I think that it's been helpful to hear this, but I don't, we can take some time to put a little more unpacked answers together,
Okay.
too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think the incentivization of behavior is better than punishment of behavior. And punishment behavior is heavy fines, which will drive people to park in the neighborhoods and the park next door, which, as I stated before, is already heavily utilized. It's sometimes difficult to park there as it is. So when you drive those costs up, you're going to drive people out into the city. The park is free parking as it is. We really can't enforce that. We can't expect you to enforce that. So my suggestion, my hope is that those fees are not to punish people and make them move, but that you guys plan to have enough parking for the students that you expect, as anybody who builds a business up there should in that situation. And that's just my my $2. And my other thing, because we're going to vote next time, I want to go back to condition number 24, the landscape height. And I just found something, page 38. So edge parking talks about 40 inches there. And then on the landscaping plans, where is it? Condition 24. And then if we look at design sheet L4, or excuse me, L6, on the lower right parking lot, it says plant height shall be 3 feet maximum on the parking
So
edge.
the code is 40 inches,
Okay, okay, so there's a disparity there
right,
for the submittal, so
which
that,
is part of why we put the condition on, because
Okay.
there was, we just wanted to make sure there wasn't a confusion about what the
And then it-
requirement was.
it does talk about like a rain garden there, and the rain gardens I've seen, they're not continuous, they're different plantscapes, they're different heights, so it's very hard to make a rain garden, which we've described here in this design plan to be 40 inches continuous. And
So part of the reason that we rebuilt the staff report and separated out the construction conditions is that those kinds of things, completely valid comment, are not like land use impacts. And instead of making you guys wade through all the little nuancy things that we're going to work through, we really wanted to focus on the elements that have, you know, site-wide impacts that move buildings around that don't let you comply from a land use perspective.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to shut down your conversation. It's just that those kinds of things ended up in the construction conditions because we know we have to address it. It's just wasn't a site-wide impact.
okay, I was cautious when I see something written on paper, and it will drive how the development is done. So, and then just as a general note, I know I've got some comments about parking, whatever, but this is an awesome project, and it's going to be great to have this campus in Issaquah.
Super, thank you. Lucy, I think we're through with our comment. You had some administrative things you wanted to discuss?
So we're going to do our next meeting in 2 weeks. We had thought we might stretch it out a little more just to be able to respond, but there are a number of things happening between various things coming up for you and also at the Development Commission. So I mentioned that just because you may have gotten a meeting invite that said the next meeting on this topic was February 19, but it's not February 19, it's February 4. So I just wanted to try and reduce the confusion. Second piece is that applications are currently open for commission positions. Carl, Scott, and Stephanie's position are up this year. I'm not sure exactly how long that application process is open, but it's still open. For the alternates, if any of you wanted to apply for Stephanie's position, she, left the commission when she moved to Vashon at the end of the year. So she's obviously not asking to refill that position. So any of the alternates who want to move up to being regular members are welcome to do so. Any comments on the staff report changes? I know this was a big effort on our part, and I think we learned a lot. I'm not sure it seems like a big change on your part, but if there were any comments or thoughts or suggestions?
Yeah. Yes, it was well done. It was large.
Shorter than it was. That's the amazing part. Okay. That was it.
Okay, I think that's all we have. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again to the applicant. Everybody's obviously despite the traffic discussions and parking discussions, very excited. It's a very compelling project, and thank you again to Bellevue College and to you guys, the staff. Appreciate it. And we're closed at 9:19. Adjourned, excuse me.